Hello! Today's stories come from r/PettyRevenge. Ooh, it's an exciting day today. Our second ever original content submitted by our very own Ren9077, who you might see in the comments pretty much every video, which is always much appreciated. He submitted a story titled, Flight of the Sexy Bumblebee. This is a friend's story. I was there for some of it, though not much. It takes place more than 10 years ago. We begin as I help my friend Lance move from our hometown to the city where I was living at the time as he left his unfaithful wife. Lance is in his late 20s at this time, fairly tall, and had always been relatively athletic, running just a bit fat now from depression, pale, and had a shaved head and beard. Creating a mental image for later. Important. I was not in a position to offer him a place to stay, but he had another friend from online gaming who we'll call Johnny. Johnny was a bit of a crude dude, bro, and not the brightest, but was a kind and generous guy. One of his serious blind spots was with his other roommate, Odie. Odie was a self-described hippie. In this case, it meant he wouldn't work, would borrow or steal money or things, and trade them for drugs. He also didn't help out around the house or anything. He would wake up, mooch food, find something to steal or some hustle to work, score drugs, invite friends over to get high with, sleep it off, and repeat. Odie and his friends were friendly enough at first, until he found out that Lance and I weren't interested in getting high with them, nor providing drugs or money, and we watched our things closely. They took offense to that and started getting dismissive, then outright nasty. They got physically threatening a few times, with Lance more than me, but we laughed that off. While we're not huge, we were and are fairly built and had been training in martial arts together for more than 10 years at that point. At this point, I was busy and wasn't visiting often, but as Lance told me, the situation devolved into a cycle of Odie and his friends trying to intimidate and rob Lance, and Lance physically manhandling, but not hurting, them out of the way. Then came the day Odie and some friends vanished downstairs for days, taking a lot of food and beer Johnny and Lance had paid for, coming up to use the bathroom and not much else, at first. Their cars were taking up more than the entire driveway, causing a lot of inconvenience. Calls down to them to move their cars were met with swearing. Everyone just kind of worked around them for a few days. Then, on the third day, the chaos really began. They did start coming upstairs, and they were sprinting through the house, shouting and screaming, beating on the walls and furniture and things that were potentially breakable, before vanishing back downstairs for a little while and then doing the whole thing again. It was surreal, dangerous, and loud enough that the neighbors were probably going to call the police eventually. It was at this time Lance had enough. He went to Johnny's room and after some digging, found a relic of one of Johnny's ex-girlfriends. A sexy Bumblebee Halloween costume made for a petite, young woman. Into these scant few, poor, tiny, stretchy bits of fabric, Lance stuffs himself. Remember, a tallish, athletic, running to fat man with lots of pale and hairy flesh, a shaved head, and a beard, trying to wear a skimpy costume several sizes too small. Not the most appealing sight, and incredibly surreal. I did not study the matter, but I'm told that not all the important bits were fully covered by the little bikini bottom. So dressed, Lance stomps down the stairs. When he gets there, he sees Odie and his friends staring at him in wide-eyed terror. He starts grabbing them one by one, pinning them to walls or furniture, growling suggestive things to them. Don't worry about that, it's just my stinger. As those important yet not quite fully covered bits had been noticed. Then moving on to the next to repeat this. By the time we left, Odie and his friends were bawling in terror, and we were laughing uproariously. It is at this point that Johnny admits that he did in fact know what Odie and his friends had been doing down there. Acid for 3 days straight so far, and the trip had probably just gone very, very bad. As you might have guessed, this living situation wasn't the most stable, and about a month later, it came to an abrupt end. Johnny had fallen behind on rent in supporting Odie's drug habits, but he'd been working double time and more raking in the tips and had just barely made enough to cover the back rent and get current when it came due in 2 days. As he slept off his exhaustion, Odie raided the rent jar, took all of the money and Johnny's keys, and went to go buy drugs more than an hour's drive north from an undercover cop. Now, all the money Johnny had worked so hard for to keep a roof over his head was state's evidence. He might have been able to get it back by some means, but not in the 2 days before the landlord expected several months of back rent to be paid. As it was, I had to drive Lance on a 3-hour round trip to pick up Johnny's car. When we got back, Odie's mother was dropping off her semi-regular care package of several home-cooked meals for her son. We neglected to mention that Odie was in the custody of the state at the time, so we were left with several lovely ribeye steaks, green bean casserole, hash browns, and a few other wonderful things, all intended for the guy who just robbed my friend's blind and cost me a whole afternoon and quite a lot of gas. It was tasty. Fantastic story and super fun to read, I must say. Gotta love a guy who's willing to stuff himself into an itsy-bitsy Bumblebee costume in order to make a statement and really drive a point home. Odie was pretty much kicking a guy while he was down. What the heck? I have to say, it's no surprise that Ren was there to help a friend in need, and when it was needed most. Thanks again for the story, Ren, and for your ongoing support of the channel. I so greatly appreciate it. Our second story is short, but has a really hot ending. You break, you buy. I was a witness to this situation. Many, many moons ago, I worked for a very large guitar music store in Hollywood. When a customer wanted to try out a guitar, any guitar, we were required to get that guitar down from the wall. This often involved climbing a big ladder to get a guitar. The more expensive the instrument, the higher up it was to make it harder to steal. There was a customer that came in nearly every day and always requested the most expensive guitar. He would then choose the most expensive amplifier, turn it all the way up, and sit for hours jamming. Or at least he thought he was jamming. To us, it sounded like small furry animals being killed. This guy also never actually bought anything. He would just pick up free guitar picks with the store logo and leave when he was done. One day, a guitar salesman finally hit his breaking point and hatched a plan. He knew that a brand new, stupidly expensive amp had just come in and that our favorite customer would surely pick that one when he next came in. So guitar salesman, we'll call him GS, went over to the pro audio department and borrowed a fog machine and hid it in behind the new amp. When the not-so-talented customer came back in, GS made sure to be the one to take care of him. He climbed the ladder and got down a guitar worth several thousand and followed the customer to the new amp. Customer was stoked. GS let the guy get through his warm-ups and really get going on his jamming before secretly turning on the fog machine. It honestly looked like the whole amp was about to go up in flames. GS quickly took the guitar from the customer and told him that he'd have to get a manager. The customer had turned the amp up too far and had fried it. Unfortunately, he'd have to pay for it. Store policy. You break, you buy. The look on the customer's face was priceless, and I've never seen anyone get the heck out of that store faster. Never saw him again. Needless to say, GS was our hero, and many beers were bought for him. Good times. What a brilliant move. Having worked around a fog machine or two, I do know they give off an offensive odor, which likely added to the customer thinking he'd really messed up. I think this is hilarious. Super creative way of dealing with a huge pain of a customer. Let's check out some funny comments. Fake Mike Morgan said, his musical ambitions went up in smoke. Silly Willy 82 added, ambitions. In response to GS was our hero, Quiche Lapoodle said, I think you mean he was your guitar hero. OP replied with laughing emojis. Clown420 said, we had a guy like that. We finally asked him if he was buying or just trashing our gear. He stopped coming in. Note, homeboy never bought anything. Not strings, not picks, nothing. And I have had days where I had to restring and clean a guitar after he was done because his nasty butt couldn't bother to wash his hands first. Stereonaut said, so basically you were his practice studio. Must be nice having no shame. OP replied, it's amazing how gross people can be. Our third story is bad parking decision. One summer, about 10 years ago, I was hired by this hillbilly country western band to drive their old Greyhound bus from gig to gig. 90% of the time, the venue would have a roped off area for us to park the bus and trailer in a spot making it easy to load in and load out. So at this one gig in Texas, some redneck decides to squeeze his jacked up 4x4 shiny red crew cab dually long bed pickup between the front of the bus and the sloping dock ramp, obviously moving the rope pedestals right up against the front of the bus and thus out of the way before pulling in. His driver's side tires were on pavement, but his passenger tires were on the grassy slope down to the loading dock ramp. About a 3-foot drop for the rear tires, and roughly a 4-foot drop for the front tires. Driver's side rear tire about a foot from the left front bumper of the bus. Show's over, trailers loaded, bands on board, ready to roll. We've got a 6-hour run that night to the next venue, and Redneck is nowhere to be seen. Grassy slope sprinklers are on, soaking the side of his truck and the grass. First thought is we're boxed in. Then the band's manager gets out, looks at the truck, looks at the bus, looks at the grass, comes back and looks at the bus bumper on the truck's rear tire. Notices they line up perfectly and impossible for the bus body to come in contact with the pickup's bed. Comes to the front door and says, "We can't wait all night for this guy to show up. We're just going to push him out of the way a little bit so we can get the bus out and on our way. Let's go." Steering wheel cranked all the way to the right, inch forward until bumper touches tire. One more check for clearances by band's manager, then push. With a 500 horsepower Detroit diesel pushing through a low gear that would climb Mount Everest, there wasn't much stopping that old puppy. After about a foot or two, the tires hit the slick grass, and that was all she wrote for the pickup. The band cheered as they watched it slide down the slope and topple over on its side as we pulled out and headed for Austin. Never did hear anything about the aftermath. Band manager took a phone call from the venue, but simply told them the truck was like that when we left. Well, it was, wasn't it? Oh, the stories from that summer job. Stories, you say? I want to hear more of these stories. I can totally picture this happening. Hopefully this guy learned his lesson and he'll never box anyone in again. Let's head to the comments where we'll find more stories and some Texans that are sure to offend. Oh goodness, here we go. FatDog64 said, "I am a lifelong resident of Texas. What has always baffled me about the rednecks here is why they buy this super heavy-duty dually pickup when the heaviest thing they haul with it is their wife." Zeismog replied, "That also explains the stiffer springs on the right side of the truck." Zephin added, "Self-answering question there. After all, they saw firsthand how heavy her mother got." Harry Smutter shared, "This is awesome. I absolutely hate butthole drivers and schmucks who think they can park where they please. Just this Sunday, I had some D-bag park his Jeep with oversized tires mere inches from my driver's side. Mind you, I purposely parked my passenger side right against the curb, so I had plenty of room on the driver's side, and didn't interfere with any other people who want to park next to me. So I had to squeeze my groceries into the back and then squeeze myself into the front, trying my best not to ding my car against the Jeep. It's just ridiculous. Park like a civil person, for F's sakes." Our final story is by far the shortest, but was number 1 for the whole week. It's called "Tease Me for Wearing Non-Branded Shoes for a PE Lesson. Enjoy not being able to wear your fancy branded trainers." When I started high school, I forgot my PE kit on the first day. I had to borrow shorts and a shirt from the school. However, they had a rule where if one person forgot their trainers, the whole class had to do the PE lesson in bare feet. This was for health and safety to avoid people's bare feet getting stood on with a trainer. Suffice to say, everyone was unhappy with this. For the second PE lesson, I brought my kit. My trainers at the time were non-branded and therefore cheaper. I got teased mercilessly about this, as everyone else had Nike, Adidas, etc. So I decided I would forget my trainers again the next week. This meant everyone had to have bare feet. The boys in my class didn't like this, probably because your feet got dirty from the floor and they just preferred wearing trainers. But I didn't really mind. I kept on doing this for the rest of the term just to teach them a lesson. Some would complain to the teacher that I was doing it deliberately, but they just used to shrug and reiterate the safety rules. This is some commitment and dedication. Sounds like a recipe for future success, if you ask me. This guy will go far, mark my words. Let's check out a few comments before we wrap up. Brave Banana Moment said, just walk in the next week with trainers in hand, raise them above your head, and loudly declare, I really hope that everybody loves my trainers. I get really forgetful about bringing them whenever anybody says bad things about them. Does anybody have anything to say about my trainers? Slacking at my job shared, I grew up poor. I'm talking single mother with 5 kids in the 1970s poor. As a result, I lived with hand-me-downs from 2 older brothers and the cheapest of the cheap when we had to buy new stuff. So I absolutely know the joys of being taunted by my financially better off classmates. I was a small kid and the youngest boy in the family, so better believe I learned how to fight. As a result, I discovered very quickly that the best way to discourage bullying is to become a less inviting target by fighting back. Because even if I got my butt handed to me, they would not get away without injury. This naturally extended to replying to taunts about my clothes. So for shoes, my response would have been something like, the only difference between my Pumas and your Adidas is that my Puma is cheap and easy to replace after I shove it up your butt. Note, Puma was a low price shoe at the time. If you've enjoyed the story and would like to hear more, consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Thanks, and bye for now.